You don't know me. I don't know you, man. Is knowing anyone even possible? I'm writing this from a position in anonymity. This is the place of my last refuge. A small hermitage in the mountains. A ruined cottage on the slope of desire overlooking the valley of uncertainty. The house is made of salvaged doors, scrap lumber, cast-off windows, and roofing felt. It's located some 200 miles north, east, west, and south of your particular city. And what I put down here records a poet's travels. From earliest cognition to impending mental decay. From the Big Bang birth of matter and mind until the end of time. An ambitious span, to be sure, but there is urgency to the project. The mind fragments easily. The writing subject sublimates. The self disappears into nothing but the words that point to it, and then not even that. I am, of course, aware it's impolitic today to indulge in this vice of narcissism, but if verbosity can prolong existence, let my loquacity lead to transcendence, and Logorrhea forge my afterlife as an offering, in the hopes my words, like the lead blood of suicides and martyrs everywhere, might be a form of entertainment with real market value. After all, people pay good money to witness the disintegration of a soul that's not theirs. It's the perfect product for this late capitalist state. Regret is a pre-existing condition. Our status seems random, yet dependent on where and how we were born and what we found around us. So we dressed in the habit given and hobbled our deviant way. It was a crooked path at best, the one claimed by poets in training, leading to wisdom or ecstasy perhaps, but ending mostly at the tragedy palace of Thoreau's quiet desperation. Everybody wants to fit in, bring their lives in line with expectations. Orthopedists straighten posture. Orthodontists straighten teeth. School straightens your thinking. We are implored to walk the walk, to get things right and not to stray. Yet here I am, splay-footed with crooked fingers and a spine bent like some letter of an occult alphabet. I've got one awkward higher shoulder, a rib cage like moldy barrel staves of bone binding lungs of less than adequate power, and my obsessive-compulsive disorder leaves me disaffected, alienated. And if you examine my face through your tinted glasses, what you'll find will be many misshapen thoughts behind these coffee-colored teeth. This practiced wandering eye. Plus, I sport the unfashionable haircut of the home barber. And my clothes are years out of season. But I run with my flaws. The body follows the mind, they say. But I say the mind is nothing but the body and position. Thus the crooked path I walk is as much me as I am it. Nothing but manifestations and motions before a screen of memes and themes and selected algorithmic perspectives. We grow old. We shrink in status. Our necks grow rolled. Circumstance distorts our souls. Bullying winds and inconvenient stones try us when we take to the road. But mostly we just want to find our kind, if our kind exists or can be created, if choice can make that search profitable, then that's something to strive for. It's something to give choice that kind of power. But you know, each decision just leads to another. So there I was, one day, facing one more three-way intersection where choices had to be made. A roadhouse stood on the corner where rooms were let to undecided pilgrims. It was the Oedipus Hotel and Cafe. There was a sign upon the entrance that read, "Your mother loves you. Good luck." There was a vending machine stocked with ED medication in the lobby, and a stack of pamphlets for minor attractions. And I guess I didn't think it was odd that all the customers in the bar and diner had clock dials for faces, victims of the vicissitudes of time. I felt right at home there and took a room. But I slept poorly, dreaming fearfully of innocent loves, opportunities dismissed without consideration or foresight. And I woke up unrested and, yes, a little bit desperate. So I guess old man Thoreau was actually right. The next day, I made my way to a great city where the streets were crowded, confused and noisy with loose talk of change. The people tried and did seem to remember that there had been a turning point once, a stick pin in time, a post-it note in the wave-particle paradox of space. But they didn't know if that turning point was cataclysmic or if it came about gradually like a frog in slowly boiling water. No one could state a specific date either, only vague periods were mentioned. The 80s, the 90s, the 60s, the aughts, after that rigged election, before the AI maelstrom, pre-digital, post-AIDS, after COVID but before Elvis, after the Beatles, or was it post-Taylor but pre-Trump? Back when the gates of Eden closed for the season, but before that shocking TV documentary that changed everything, but accomplished nothing. You see, it was back in the days of ADHD. There had been a spate of earthquakes. Maybe that caused the problem. A ring of fire appeared in the sky. Solar storms were often sighted and gamma rays gone rogue in revolt. Historical conflicts were also invoked. Before the war, many were sure it was then. But what war was that? The war that came after the one before? There were so many to account for. Some traced the origin back to when they could sort of remember a purpose to their existence. Yes, identity did once seem to promise a meaningful life. Others said the problem began with an inability to make informed choices once confronted with the exponential increase of choices of consumer items, services, political opinions. And it was common for those that were still capable of reason as opposed to emotion to go off in long, self-assured tirades about our inglorious end, at the end of which they might humbly state that maybe they were wrong about it all anyway. So please don't pay any attention to anything they just said. Like many a modern politician and pundit, they simply misspoke rather than lied, followed rather than led, and repeated what was told to them while thinking that what they did say was actually their own thought, which everyone knew it wasn't. And so in the end, the questions didn't matter. Everyone just went about their day dismissing the charges against them while following their bliss toward profits. But not me. I was arrested and put on trial for imagined crimes. Not mine, mind you, but those of the culture at large. When asked how long I'd been in town, off the top of my head I said 4 months, but I didn't really know. It seemed longer. They asked what I did for a living. That was the first of many mistakes. I have a job, I said, but it's not living. Then where do you come from? Who are your people, your significant relations? Please state your background and class affiliation. At this point I blanked, as no place, no game, no exchange value, original sin, or primal shame came to my mind, for I was never fully arriving or departing, but always only waking up, or just waiting for Godot, waiting for Bozo, waiting for some messiah. I didn't know who. I did remember, however, how opposites once seemed like valid destinations, and there were highways on which to engage them, long roads bordered by jagged shoulders, rough thorn brush and Jurassic sunflowers, bad water, and the mournful shadows of weeds bent over in subservience to the chemical greed of beings who could not resist to drive for increase. That neurological craving of the living for their like. But I also felt a yearning and a regret for both the long and recent dead, and I wept for their mistakes. See, the streets were an open-air asylum in those days, a playground for warped ambition, perversion, romanticism, and capital gone wild, as the wild, wide, soft eyes of hallowed souls shone like swamp lamps in the urban labyrinths, eyes abusing and abused by desire. But how did you afford your passage through this realm of laughter and tears? To live in such a manner takes resources. The question seemed sincere, but I knew they already knew what I'd done and where I'd been. So I said, selling blood on the main stems of old coastal cities and Midwest factory towns. Yes, I recall it was back in 73 or 77, one of those years in that decade of despondency. Or was it the 60s, very late in that genre? It was a time of violent trends, distraught dreams, men without names and women searching for dignity, security, and the means of revenge. Headlines screamed from different cities, another slasher on the loose, 5 vagrants' throats slit in as many days. And you? They inquired. Did you feel any responsibility for such crimes of hate? Or did you feel sympathy for the perpetrators? After all, guilt for the public poverty of spirit is kind of a popular thing now. The question confused me. Culpable by mere presence? Complicit due to an unasked-for existence? These were questions to ponder, but impossible to answer. Of course, they expected no answer. The answers were already given. It was given that people were guilty until proven innocent. I don't know, I said. The towns were full of mystery. Juxtaposition, deviance, and liminality were the currencies then. And I was merely one more traveler dropping in where he didn't belong, which was everywhere then. As there was nothing to learn and little worth knowing to pursue, but I paid for my apathy dearly. So to their charge of complicity I replied, okay, you win. Perhaps it's true I did make indifference an art of survival, but so does everybody who suffers to control. Well, son, you have one phone call. Let it be to someone who actually cares for those secrets and passions you hold so close to your tortured soul. And they placed a old black rotary phone on the table and left the room. But it was a joke. The line had been cut. There was no dial tone and no way to reach the outside world. The charge against me was unnatural vagrancy and insufficient empathy. But my pro bono defense addressed the court with an argument that really kind of worked against me. My transience was chosen, she said, not forced. My wanderlust was entitled, contrary to the truth of the human condition. You see, people shift and move about for many reasons, some for spiritual freedom, some for preservation of body and tribe. They are driven from their communities by drought, wildfire, poison air, earthquake, flood, hurricanes, tsunamis. Yes, the list of natural atrocities is as long as the curiosity that plagues this race, as long as the sin of defining sin for the benefit of the state. Thus out of Africa, Eden, east and west to Europe and Asia and the rest, crossing the Bosphorus and the Bering Strait, braving the passage on fishing boats, rubber rafts, cattle ships, and doomed Titanics, box trucks, wagon trains, and hijacked airplanes. All because people must reject the security of place, partly out of greed, but mostly from hate, for we simply distrust our own kind. We constantly flee from ourselves. We even cross the street when we see ourselves. Vagabond bands like the Pala in Roma or the Horsemen of Mongolia are suspicious of strangers and roam their lands, ignoring the human-drawn boundaries of nations that seek to control or enslave them. Dictators, despots, capital oppression. They come from all corners of the map, refugees from their own species, Huguenots fleeing religious persecution, peasantry fleeing the French Revolution, Irish fleeing the British and famine, Jews fleeing Egypt and European pogroms, Belgians and Poles fleeing Nazi occupation, Hungarians fleeing Soviet aggression, African Americans fleeing racism, Ugandans fleeing Idi Amin, Cypriots fleeing Turks and Greeks, Vietnamese fleeing the Viet Cong, fleeing their American saviors, Chileans fleeing Pinochet, Mozambicans, Libyans fleeing civil war, Somalis, Laotians fleeing civil war, Cambodians, Sudanese fleeing civil war, Koreans, Sri Lankans fleeing civil war, Iraqis, Algerians fleeing colonial war, Bangladeshis fleeing liberation war, Bolivians, Cubans fleeing revolution wars, Palestinians fleeing Israeli persecution, Pakistanis fleeing into partition, Bosnians fleeing ethnic cleansing, Kosovarans fleeing Serbia, Romani fleeing Ceausescu, Kurds fleeing Iraq, Turkey, and Iran, Tibetans fleeing Sino-domination, Afghans fleeing Taliban, Rwandans fleeing genocide, Rohingyas fleeing genocide, Nigerians and Congolese fleeing, Armenians and Azerbaijanis fleeing, Georgians and Pakistanis fleeing, Eritreans, Ukrainians, Malays fleeing, Central African Republicans fleeing. The persecuted classes of the world have never stopped fleeing chronic privation. Even the rural workers who flee troubled times, the dead industry and mine workers fleeing, the erstwhile hobos of the American railroads, the bums with their nickels and bindles, the migrants, with mattresses tied to their roofs, hitchhikers and truck-fed tramps, Dust Bowl Tom Joads and Woody Guthries following great migrations to pastures of plenty, to northern factories, women and children everywhere fleeing abandonment, abuse, dislocation, urban class war, turf war, cartel armies, street gangs, landlords, whose predatory rents send millions to the street, to migrate from one neighborhood to another, to live in cardboard boxes, makeshift tents, domestic abuse shelters, and refugee camps. Hundreds of millions every year. And you can see them clinging to your streetcar sideboards, hiding in the undercarriage, sleeping on the luggage racks, yes, and if you listen closely, you might hear their footsteps, even in your own home, late at night, even as we can pontificate and poeticize about their plight, raising our moral voices in righteous rage, the result of which mostly masks the actual cries coming from this wilderness we have sown with our own civilized hands and tongues, this garden that we water constantly with our tears. My lawyer closed her defense. But her pleas fell on deaf ears. The presiding magistrate turned to the jury, who in their turn needed no time at all. Guilty, they shouted with excess enthusiasm. We condemn this defendant for complicity through inaction, and therefore sentence him to further inaction unto death. For it had long been decided that to be sentenced to one's own life, condemned to live and relive it in reflection, all while awaiting certain execution, that this would be our human curse, and where else serve my remaining hours on this earth but my comfortable ragtag house doors, where the old windows are streaked from rain and lamentation. You know, I love the sadness empty houses express, because a building can shed tears for past events and the difficult years of those who have paused there, seeking respite from their long travels. And I like the idea that the world could and would cry in my place, even as the universe itself unraveled to its ultimate whimpering end. Heat death is said to be pretty final. Nothing is left to matter anymore except perhaps the germ of a metaphor, a conceptual speck like a milkweed seed traveling on the breeze generated by the butterfly frail wing beat of some long ago, long lost intelligence. In fact, an outside perspective might be needed to see it. As if any perspective could ever be far enough outside of it. As if there were any seer left to see or any it to be seen. Well, then perhaps all those diffuse inactive particles of our has-been universe might coalesce to form a test pattern. Something like those late-night TV emissions from the 50s and 60s, where a noble Native American bears the caption, "Stand by," which basically meant stand by for the advertised culture to come, tomorrow or just later, in better days or lesser. But there were no days anymore, no later, and in place of our noble indigenous forebear, the head of a great joker appeared, a pointillist clown of consciousness, a floating fool's face composed of gluons, mesons, hopes, and jokes, with its own urgent test pattern caption, not to stand by, but to wake up. Wake the fuck up. An alarm clock rings. Somewhere through the unmeasured silence, Vishnu lights a cigarette with impatience. Kali Ma picks up her cemetery broom handle, takes a swing and knocks that snarky fool's mug straight out of stasis and into the far bleacher seats. There's the roar of the crowd of possibilities. The path to consciousness is reborn, dependent on, of course, on some half-baked truth that self-fulfilling prophecies might actually have a use, as across the loose weave in the entropy of matter, be it anti or anti, dark or light, a fresh road might lead out of endless night, because consciousness may well be some kind of neural delusion, but delusions never quit without a fight.